When the woman next door, Corinne, a bit more, banged on our front door, screaming that she had the right to inspect our newborn daughter because she was a resident asset of the HOA, I thought I was hallucinating from sleep deprivation. But when my wife Emily came running into the room clutching the baby, her face white as chalk, I realized this nightmare was real, and it had a name: Corinne. President of the Millstone Ridge Homeowners Association, and apparently gatekeeper of our child's existence. We'd only lived in the neighborhood for 3 weeks. Emily had just given birth, and we had moved to Millstone Ridge thinking it was a quiet, secure place to raise a family, a pristine community nestled behind gates and white fences, filled with smiling people, trimmed hedges, and cookie-cutter homes that promised peace. But we didn't know the kind of power Karen had accumulated over the years, or the way she wrapped it around herself like a crown. On that first night when we arrived, she was waiting on the sidewalk in a navy pantsuit, arms folded, clipboard pressed tightly against her chest like a weapon. "Welcome to Millstone," she said with a brittle smile, her eyes scanning our moving truck like she was mentally listing violations. "We run a very strict association here. I'll be your point of contact." That same day, she'll find us. $75 for leaving a cardboard box on the curb during daylight hours, and another $150 for the sound of our garage door opening too early. I brushed it off, assuming she was just an overzealous HOA president with too much time and too little joy. But then Emily gave birth at home, an unexpected early labor with the help of a midwife, and Karen lost her mind. She accused us of violating HOA emergency protocol, claimed that all in-home medical events must be registered in advance, and sent us a certified letter stating the baby's residency status must be approved by the association. I thought it was a bad joke. Emily was still recovering from the labor. Our daughter Grace was barely 6 pounds and sleeping between feedings, and we were drowning in diapers, formula bottles, and exhaustion. But Karen wasn't joking. She began patrolling our property at night with a flashlight, claiming she was checking for noise violations. She knocked on our door at 3 a.m. and said she'd heard an infant crying too long and needed to inspect the nursery to confirm we had appropriate soundproofing installed. I shut the door in her face, and the next day, citation arrived, $500 for aggressive behavior and obstruction of HOA business. I told her to leave us alone, but she escalated. She filed a complaint with Child Protective Services, claiming that we had unsanitary conditions in the nursery. 2 agents arrived that week, unannounced, searching our home while Karen stood outside, grinning with her arms folded, like she had summoned them herself. The agents left, apologetic after finding nothing wrong, but the seed had been planted. Emily started crying every night, afraid they'd come back and take Grace away. Karen's campaign was no longer about rules. It was psychological warfare. I went to the HOA office, really just a converted room in Karen's garage, and demanded a formal meeting. She refused. Instead, she issued a public bulletin stating our family was non-compliant and warned others in the neighborhood to avoid engagements that may involve legal risks. The next week, our lawn was spray painted with the word unfit. No one saw who did it, but the paint was HOA, red, the same color Karen used on her violation notices. The stress began breaking Emily down. She wouldn't let Grace out of her sight, refused to sleep, and jumped at every knock or car passing by. I installed cameras, security lights, alarms, but Karen didn't stop. She emailed us HOA bylaws with sections she'd fabricated pages, claiming the association had the right to conduct wellness checks on minors, that community property included new residents under age 1. I confronted her on the sidewalk, yelling that she was insane, and she calmly said, "You don't understand the structure of this community. Children belong to the village, and I am the elected steward of the village." I called the police, but they said she hadn't broken any laws? Not yet. Then one morning, we woke up to find a printed form shoved under our door. It was titled HOA, Child Transfer of Custody, Requests Temporary Guardianship Evaluation. It had Karen's signature already filled out. There was a blank space next to it, waiting for hours. I almost broke the glass sliding door from how hard I threw it against the wall. Emily was shaking. She whispered, "She's going to take her." She's really going to try. That night, I stayed awake with a bat in my hand, watching the security cameras. At 2:13 a.m., I saw Karen walking the perimeter of our house, wearing gloves and holding a flashlight. I called 911. When officers arrived, she told them she was performing an HOA-permitted wellness patrol for noise irregularities and that she had authorization to be on our property. She pulled out a forged document. I showed the police my own surveillance footage. They let her go, but one officer leaned in and said quietly, "You need to file a restraining order." Tonight I did, but Karen wasn't scared. System. The next morning, she filed a motion with the HOA board stacked with her friends, declaring our home in violation of community harmony standards. They voted 3-0 to begin probationary enforcement, a process that included weekly home reviews and HOA oversight of infant care. I went to the city. I filed complaints. I contacted lawyers. And that's when I discovered something terrifying. Karen had filed a community child interest docket at the local court, claiming she was acting as a community advocate. Under an obscure family court statute related to communal guardianship disputes, she had real paperwork. I stood outside the courthouse staring at a printed docket entry with my daughter's name on it. Emily collapsed when I told her. We packed bags. Didn't know if we were safe. I called the media, desperate. No one listened. But someone else had seen what was happening, Mr. Dalton. Our 79-year-old neighbor who had lived in Millstone Ridge for over 30 years. He knocked on our door and handed me a dusty file of HOA records from 2006. Inside were complaints from another family, also new parents who left after. Karen filed custody claims against them too. It had happened before. I had proof. And now, I had a mission: expose her, destroy the false authority she had built, protect my family at all costs, if I had to bring every agency in the state down on Millstone Ridge to do it. The morning after Mr. Dalton handed me the dusty file, I barely slept, too wired by a cocktail of adrenaline rage and fear as I combed through the old reports under a lamp while Emily dozed fitfully on the couch beside Grace's bassinet. Baseball bat lying beside her like a lifeline. And though some pages had water damage and others were barely legible, what I found chilled me to the bone. A family named Harper, who had moved into Millstone Ridge in 2006, had experienced almost the exact same tormenting, aggressive HOA campaign led by Karen under the guise of community protection, with inspections, false CPS reports, and ultimately a petition for neighborhood guardianship. Filed just days before the Harpers abruptly sold their home and left town, vanishing from the records with nothing more than a brief letter to the board calling the community place of coordinated cruelty under the rule of one disturbed woman. And though it had been quietly buried and dismissed as hearsay at the time, there were notarized forms and board minutes that proved Karen had orchestrated the entire attack. And suddenly, I realized this wasn't just about us or some neighborhood turf warette. It was a pattern. A sick obsession Karen had masked. Under HOA authority for nearly 2 decades, with the evidence in hand, I drove to the city courthouse and demanded an emergency meeting with the municipal legal advisor. I laid everything out. The forged notices, the fake guardianship forms, the manipulated bylaws. Now this historical proof that Karen had done it before. The advisor listened carefully, took photos of the documents, and then leaned back with a sigh, telling me what I already feared. It's horrifying, but she's smart. She operates in the gray zones of HOA law, and she doesn't make moves. Without shields, he advised that I compile everything and take it directly to the district attorney, and I did that same day, leaving a copy of the entire file with the DAS assistant, while Emily texted me every few minutes that Karen had walked past the house 3 times, stopping to take pictures, and once stood at the edge of the property, muttering words Emily couldn't hear but could feel were meant as threats. That night, we moved Grace's bassinet into our bedroom and slept in shifts, watching the monitors like we were stationed in a war zone. And the next morning, Karen escalated. She filed a protective custody motion with family court, claiming clear signs of parental instability and emotional distress in the mother. Referencing the previous Child Protective Services visit and including photographs of Emily crying on the porch, which she had clearly taken without consent, and the truly terrifying part was that the court stamped it for review. We were now listed as defendants in a hearing about our own child. Emily broke down, sobbing that they were going to take Grace, that she'd never see her again. And I had to hold her so tightly I thought I might crack her ribs, just to keep her from shattering into 1,000 pieces. I immediately called the attorney I had spoken to earlier and begged him to file a motion to dismiss, to block the hearing, to do anything. He said the best thing we could do was countersue and expose Karen publicly. So I did the one thing I knew would drag her into the daylight. I went to the local press. I contacted Channel 12 News, sent them every file, every fake citation, every photograph, and within 24 hours, a reporter named Claire Bryson was parked outside our home with a camera crew doing a full segment titled HOA President, accused of trying to seize newborn through HOA bylaws, and when it aired that evening, Millstone Ridge exploded. Phones lit up. Cars stopped on our street. Neighbors who had never spoken to us before suddenly came over in waves, telling us their own stories. Small but chilling. Fine for leaving a stroller on the porch. Being reported for letting a toddler splash in a kiddie pool, one woman said. Karen once questioned her for unsanctioned play activity because her kids drew on the sidewalk with chalk. It was everywhere. This quiet oppression they had all just accepted because no one had ever pushed back hard enough. But now that it was public, now that the press was digging into HOA documents and interviewing former board members and even chasing down the Harper family who had fled nearly 20 years ago and still remembered the fear, Karen panicked. Next day, she held a press conference on her own lawn, standing behind a podium with the HOA seal and ranting to the cameras about personal attacks and character defamation, saying that we were radicals sent to destroy the values of this peaceful community. But her voice trembled, and behind her eyes you could see the crack forming in the fortress she'd spent years building. But she wasn't done. She filed a restraining order against me, claiming I had threatened her life. And though the judge saw through it and threw it out in minutes, the fact that she even tried it meant she was flailing and dangerous. Meanwhile, the HOA board, terrified of the scrutiny, began resigning one by one. By the weekend, the treasurer, secretary, and grounds director had all stepped down, citing health concerns or family obligations, and the city officially froze the HOA's authority pending a full audit. But even with the power structure collapsing, Karen kept pushing, filing documents, cornering our neighbors, even mailing a flyer around the block, calling us child welfare risks and manipulative agitators. I brought the flyer to the police, and this time with mounting evidence. They finally opened an investigation not into harassment, but into stalking, fraud, and unlawful impersonation of legal authority. And yet even then, I knew she wouldn't stop until she was physically removed from this place. The court date for the guardianship hearing arrived on a stormy Wednesday morning. We showed up in suits, holding Grace in Emily's arms, flanked by our lawyer, the DAS rep, and 3 news crews in the hallway. Karen arrived alone, dressed in red, with a binder thicker than a brick and a face that looked like it had never known doubt. She argued her case for 30 minutes, rambling about community oversight, infant welfare, noise ordinances, and spiritual contamination from noncompliance. And when the judge interrupted to ask if she had any legal grounds to file for, custody, she actually said. The HOA charter gives me guardianship by extension if the parents fail to maintain property harmony. The courtroom fell silent. The judge stared at her for a long, cold moment and then said, "Miss Whitmore, you're dismissed. Permanently. If you file one more motion against this family, you'll be charged with harassment and judicial fraud." Karen didn't flinch. She stood, collected her papers, and walked out with her head held high. But I saw it in her hands, they trembled, and I knew she had lost. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, and I finally spoke to them directly. This woman weaponized a community and tried to steal our daughter using fake documents, lies, and intimidation. But we fought back, and we're still here. The people listened. They began to fight back too. But something in Karen's eyes that day told me she wasn't finished, not yet. there was something else she was planning, something darker. The nightmare wasn't over, not while she still breathed HOA power. The days following the courtroom dismissal should have brought relief. But instead, they brought silence, an eerie, unnatural silence that settled over Millstone Ridge like fog after a fire. The kind of silence that doesn't come with peace, but with the anticipation of something terrible just around the bend. And every time Emily looked out the window, every time the baby monitor clicked softly from the nursery, I could feel her flinch, expecting Karen to appear again, clipboard in hand, eyes burning with that terrifying, unwavering belief that what she was doing was right. The hearing had discredited her publicly and legally, but it hadn't dismantled whatever structure she had built beneath the surface. That much became clear when a city investigator named Madeline Griggs showed up at our door one afternoon, flashing a badge and holding a file marked Special Inquiry, Municipal Oversight Request. She explained that the mayor's office had received not one, not 10, but over 30 complaints about Millstone Ridge HOA within the last month, some new. Some from years ago, all eerily similar in content: unjustified fines, psychological harassment, fabricated rules, and most disturbingly, several from former families who claimed they had left the neighborhood after Karen made veiled or explicit suggestions that their children would be better off under HOA supervision. What started as an abuse of power case was now officially being examined as potential organized coercion under a state ordinance. Rarely invoked community authority overreach involving minors. Invited her in, showed her everything: the fake custody forms, the fines, the surveillance footage, and the files Mr. Dalton had given us. She listened without interrupting, her face unreadable, until I showed her the 2006 Harper documents, at which point she asked to make copies and immediately called her office to initiate a full data pull on Karen Whitmore's HOA tenure. "She's done this before," I said quietly, and Griggs nodded. "Yes, and I think she's tried it more times than we know." That same evening, the HOA's former treasurer, a meek man named Paul Davidson, knocked on our door with trembling hands and an envelope. Inside were emails, dozens of them between Karen and board members dating back 10 years. Most were innocuous at first glance, but a pattern emerged quickly: coded references to resident profiling, offspring environment checks, community transition protocols. In one email, Karen wrote, "If we can't ensure parenting compliance, we must consider alternative oversight options. I have a draft in place." Another, even more chilling, simply read, "The child will be safe. They always are eventually." I sent the entire batch to Griggs, who immediately escalated the case to state level. A new investigative team was formed within days. Karen, meanwhile, had retreated. Her lawn grew overgrown. Her windows stayed shut. She didn't respond to the latest HOA meeting notice. But then something happened that shattered the illusion of safety. A man in a maintenance uniform was seen walking around our backyard at 3 a.m. when I confronted him. He bolted, jumping the fence and disappearing between houses. The police arrived 10 minutes later, but couldn't locate him. The next morning, I checked the cameras and froze. He hadn't just wandered. He had stood outside Grace's window for 10 straight minutes, doing nothing, just watching. That day one installed. Iron locks reinforced our doors and told Emily to take Grace and stay with her sister 3 hours away. I wasn't going to let whatever this was reach my daughter again, but I stayed. I needed to finish this. A week later, Griggs returned with 2 more investigators and a copy of Karen's employment history, something no one had thought to check. What they found was disturbing. Before moving to Millstone Ridge, Karen had worked for a controversial private foster placement group that had been investigated in the early 2000s for coercive adoptions, intimidation of at-risk families, and fabricating reports to pressure single or struggling parents into surrendering custody. Though the organization had dissolved and the investigation had gone cold, Karen's name was listed as a program coordinator in the files. No convictions had ever been brought, but several whistleblowers had described her as persistent, manipulative, and obsessed with control. Suddenly, everything made sense. Her obsession with HOA authority, her fabricated rules, Her attempts to insert herself into the lives of young families, it wasn't just about power, it was personal. She saw herself as a gatekeeper of children, and the HOA was merely her weapon. The investigators began compiling a formal case file for state prosecution. Meanwhile, I received an envelope in the mail, no return address, no stamp. Inside was a photo, grainy, black and white. It showed Emily walking through our house, holding Grace. The angle was from inside, the back corner of the nursery. But I had checked every square inch of that room. There were no cameras, no holes, no devices. I turned the picture over and, written in blocky red marker, were the words, "You can't hide what's mine." I called Griggs in a panic. They swept the house, brought in thermal scanners and RF detectors, and found a tiny wireless pinhole camera behind the wall vent in the nursery. It had been installed weeks ago. Karen had been watching our baby. Somehow, somewhere along the way, she had entered our home, violated the only place we thought was still safe. Emily wanted to come back, to pack up and leave, but I told her to stay where she was. I had already decided I wasn't running. I wanted Karen gone, and I was going to be the one to make it happen. That same day, Griggs got the final piece she needed. A former HOA board member, now living out of state, came forward with audio recordings of Karen from a private meeting in 2018, where she talked openly about her vision of corrective stewardship, saying some children don't thrive under weak parents. If I have to step in, then so be it. They'll thank me when they're older. The audio leaked online and went viral in a matter of hours. The backlash was immediate. Karen became a pariah. The city revoked the HOA's operating license. The mayor ordered police protection for all families previously targeted. And finally, after years of acting without restraint, Karen Whitmore was arrested on charges of stalking, illegal surveillance, harassment, endangerment, and unlawful impersonation of state authority. But she didn't go quietly. She screamed as they cuffed her, screamed that the HOA wasn't dead, screamed that the child will come back to me. And as they shoved her into the back of a squad car, her voice cracked through the air like a curse echoing down the clean streets. She once ruled like a queen of manicured madness. But I didn't flinch. I watched her disappear, and I finally felt something I hadn't in weeks' clarity. But as I turned to walk back inside, I noticed something strange. My mailbox flag was up. I hadn't put it up. Inside the box was a letter. No address, just a single sheet. "She's not alone," it read. She was never the only one watching. And just like that, I realized this wasn't over, not even close. I stared at the letter in my hand. The words, "She's not alone." She was never the only one watching. Pulsing like a warning flare in my brain, and though the paper was unmarked, the envelope untraceable. Oh no. I knew instantly that whoever sent it had access not only to my mailbox, but to a piece of the bigger game. Karen had been playing something darker. Something that didn't end with her screaming in the back of a police cruiser. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my living room with all the lights on, flipping through every file, every photo, every email that had anything to do with Karen or the HOA, looking for something I had missed, some connection I hadn't seen before. Around 3 a.m., I found it. A single line in one of the older emails from Paul Davidson, the former HOA treasurer. Karen had written, "The candidates from the Elmhurst trial have confirmed long-term support. Their pilot model proved stable." I had skimmed it before, assuming it was HOA legalese. But now that phrase Elmhurst trial burned a hole in the center of my mind. I Googled it, and what I found made my stomach turn cold. Elmhurst wasn't a law firm or vendor. It was a neighborhood, just like ours. And in 2010, it had gone through a massive scandal involving a rogue HOA president who had implemented a set of so-called social parenting standards as part of a pilot program tied to a now-defunct nonprofit called Civic Legacy. The allegations were nearly identical to Karen's methods: oversight of family structure, unauthorized home visits, psychological profiling of children, even guardianship transfers filed under the guise of community wellness enforcement. No criminal charges had ever stuck. The HOA president had vanished, and the community was left fractured and terrified. I dug deeper and discovered that Karen had traveled to Elmhurst twice during that year, listed as a guest speaker at 2 private urban governance retreats. Suddenly, the dots began to connect. This wasn't just Karen being unhinged. This was a network, a philosophy, maybe even a movement. And it had been incubating in plain sight, within gated communities and behind legal HOA walls.
Always.
One immediately called Madeline Griggs and explained everything. She confirmed that the state had received similar reports in other areas, but lacked evidence to tie them together. Until now, Karen's arrest and the materials I had, we finally had a map. But that didn't make us safe. That same day, my front door was egged, not by kids. The yolks were arranged in a perfect triangle, dripping downward like some kind of warning sign. My driveway was chalked with the word traitor in block letters. The security footage showed nothing. No movement, no entry. Nothing but static for 6 minutes, like someone had jammed the feed. I called Emily and told her not to come back. Not yet. And she cried on the phone saying she wanted to come home, but I told her that home wasn't safe. Not until I knew who else was involved. The following morning, I found something shoved through my front window mail slot, a photo of Grace again, this time in her car seat. Taken at a grocery store from behind a parked car, Emily had only gone out once that week. Someone was following them. I called the police again, and though they filed a report, their tone was measured, cautious, like they didn't know what they were dealing with or didn't want to admit it. Griggs, on the other hand, was furious. She came down in person and informed me that Karen had not been acting alone. A deeper investigation had uncovered records of encrypted online chats between her and at least 4 other HOA presidents in different states, all using aliases, all referencing terms like child reintegration, neighborhood sovereignty, and community child transfers. Griggs told me the FBI had now opened a formal inquiry into civic legacy, and it's possible. Resurrection under different names. But the real bombshell dropped when Griggs asked me a question I wasn't prepared for. David, has anyone ever offered you money for Grace? I blinked, stunned, and said no. Then I remembered something. A man had approached me during the press chaos after Karen's court hearing. Tall, gray hair, clean suit. I thought he was a reporter, but he had no camera, no notepad. He had asked if Emily and I were prepared for the burden of long-term care, and when I told him to get lost, he had simply said, "There are always families willing to take the load off when the system fails." At the time, I thought. It was a sick comment. Now, I wasn't so sure. I described the man to Griggs, and she immediately requested the courthouse security footage. 2 hours later, she called me back, shaken. The man wasn't listed on any press badge list. He had parked a rental car under a fake name, and when the plates were traced, they linked to an address that no longer existed. A shell. A ghost. We weren't just dealing with a madwoman anymore. We were swimming in the tide of something much deeper. That night, I started compiling my own report, a digital timeline of every incident, every email, every known associate Karen had interacted with. I uploaded it to a cloud server, encrypted it, and sent copies to 3 trusted contacts. If something happened to me, I wanted the truth to live on, and then it happened. 2 nights later, I was driving back from the police station when I noticed. The car behind me hadn't changed lanes in 5 miles. I made 4 turns, then 6. Still there? I called 911 and told them I was being followed. They told me to head to the nearest station, but the car sped up. I ran a red light. So did they. My heart was pounding, and just when I thought they'd ram me, blue lights appeared from the side street. The car behind me peeled off and disappeared into the darkness. The cops couldn't catch them, again, but this time they believed me. One officer admitted off record that there were rumors of neighborhood watch groups that had become more than just nosy HOA types groups with ideology. Structure, even recruitment patterns. I realized then, Karen might have been the worst of them, but she wasn't unique. She was a node, a recruiter, a believer in something terrible hiding behind bureaucratic terms. Now that she was gone, others might try to fill the void or retaliate. It was no longer just protecting my family. It was hunting something ancient disguised as modern governance. And I wasn't going to stop until I dragged them all into the light. I didn't know how deep the network went, only that it was deeper than I ever imagined. And by the time the first FBI agents came knocking with an official request for all materials I had gathered, I had already prepared for it, handing over multiple drives, printouts, video logs, and personal notes that stretched across 2 large boxes. Each one filled with the madness Karen Whitmore had started, but not created. Because now it was clear she had only been a seed planted in a larger soil of control and ideology disguised as neighborhood governance. One that believed in the redistribution of children, the weaponization of community bylaws, and the silencing of parents who didn't meet their manufactured standards. Emily still refused to return. Not until they arrested the man who had taken the photo of Grace in the grocery store parking lot. And I didn't blame her. Our lives had turned into a constant blur of headlights, door cameras, encrypted emails, and coded threats. Felt like we were caught in a war against a system that didn't exist on paper, but operated in whispers and shadows. With no single face or name to cut off, just a philosophy passed from one HOA tyrant to another. But then, something shifted. The media, already on fire from Karen's trial, got hold of the Elmhurst connection. Then another link in Florida. Then one in Utah. A national investigation began, quietly at first, and then explosively after leaked. Documents showed evidence of internal HOA memos being used in family court petitions. What followed was a series of raids in 3 states, and several HOA officials were arrested for crimes, ranging from document forgery to child endangerment to conspiracy to defraud the state. Karen's name resurfaced again, and even from jail. She filed motions 5 in 1 week each, one attempting to insert herself back into court proceedings involving unrelated children. Judges began placing bans on her filings. Her access to communications was revoked. Her lawyer abandoned her case after a video surfaced of her in a past HOA meeting screaming about harvesting potential from mismanaged minors. But even as her power crumbled, the fear lingered. We received another letter this time, postmarked from a different state. Inside was a photo of Karen, taken in her jail cell, with a red circle drawn around her eye, and the words, "We don't need her to continue." We remember the blueprint. Griggs told us to stay alert. FBI installed a private line directly into our home. Then one night, Grace went missing. It was 3:12 a.m. Emily woke up screaming from a dream, ran to the nursery, and found the crib empty, no signs of forced entry, no sounds, no movement on the cameras. Again, just static. For 2 minutes, our world stopped breathing. Then we found her, somehow, in the laundry room, still asleep in her carrier. Untouched, unbothered, like someone had moved her deliberately, just to send a message. It was no longer just about power, it was about psychological siege. I called every news outlet, every contact, every investigator, and demanded full protection. A federal agent was assigned to our home. I installed biometric locks, panic buttons, and 24/7 infrared surveillance. And still, I knew that wasn't enough. I needed to end this. That's when I decided to go public again this time, not just with documents or interviews, but with names, places, testimonies from other families who came forward and shared their stories under the promise that I would protect their identities. I gathered everything into a single documentary, titled The HOA Deception, When Communities Turn Predatory, and released it online. Within 48 hours, it had over 3 million views. Lawmakers saw it. Whistleblowers began sending emails from places I had never heard of. Even a former HOA software developer reached out and confessed that he had been paid to design custom violation algorithms that flagged families based on stroller brands, window decorations, and noise patterns. It was no longer a conspiracy. It was a nationwide abuse structure hiding behind homeowners associations. And Karen Whitmore had been one of its boldest disciples. When she saw the film, she reportedly went into a screaming fit in her cell and had to be placed in isolation. But the part that truly broke her came weeks later, when the state of California passed the first HOA Accountability Reform Act, banning private HOAs from enacting policies involving minors, medical decisions, or surveillance outside of direct law enforcement requests. Karen had failed, but I wasn't satisfied with just a win. I wanted a guarantee that no other family would suffer the way we did. I kept pushing, speaking at city councils, testifying before state commissions, leading parent protection workshops across the country. Emily eventually came home, her eyes tired but no longer terrified, and we rebuilt, slowly. Grace learned to crawl, then walk, and each step she took felt like a small victory against the nightmare we'd endured. Karen was eventually sentenced to 9 years in state prison with a mandatory psychological evaluation. Her home was sold by the city and repurposed as a community resource center for at-risk families. The HOA was disbanded, its charter permanently revoked, but the echoes remain. Sometimes I still find notes left under my windshield. Sometimes the cameras glitch for just a second longer than they should, but I don't flinch anymore. I'm not afraid. I've seen the monster in daylight, and I survived. So if you're watching this and think your neighborhood is just a little too quiet, a little too perfect, and the woman with the clipboard at the end of your block watches, your child a little too closely trusts your gut. It's not just an HOA. Sometimes it's a battlefield. And every parent has the right to fight for their home, their child, and their truth. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If you want to hear more true drama, more real stories that people are too afraid to tell, then do one. Subscribe to the Sham Stories YouTube channel. Few stories matter. You deserve to hear them before they happen to you.